The Yakuza franchise on the ROG Ally, Yakuza 0, 3, 4, 5, 6, Kiwami 1, Kiwami 2, Gaiden, the man who raised his name, Like a Dragon, and Infinite Wealth. So let's get into them. We start with Yakuza 0, 1080p, 120, the basically native screen resolution and refresh rate, everything like this. Ignore SSAA, is super demanding. And we're getting a very high frame rate at 18 watts, so this should give you 90 minutes of battery on a full charge. We're at 84% battery at the moment. Sorry, 82. So yeah, 1.5 hours is basically as good as it can get for a ROG Ally, not the X version. Well, the game works pretty well, to be expected. This, funnily enough, on Japan was a PS3 game, and then it came on PS4 at 60 FPS. So if you don't know, yeah, on Japan this game is also on PlayStation 3. Kinda crazy. And we're well within the VRR window, as you can probably notice. If we're between 48 and 120, that's how it goes. There are some sections where it can drop into the 60s, but it's mostly running around the city. It's not like it's going to drop below 60 while in combat. In combat is usually closed environments. Pretty simple stuff. So yeah, not much to worry about. If you are plugged into the wall and play at 30 watts, you're probably going to be into the 80s here instead of the 70s. So again, well within the VRR window, and I think in this game you don't really need 100 FPS. I mean, don't get me wrong, it looks nice, but I don't know, I think it will be a waste of battery. I'll just lock it to 60 and have fun. This is a fantastic game. I play a lot of it on PlayStation 4 actually. I have over 100 hours, I think. So yeah, this is one of those that I highly recommend. If you never played Yakuza, start on the one that is called 0. Remember that Yakuza 1 was a PS2 game, so they rebuilt it with the newer engine at the time. These are the settings, very similar to Yakuza 2. Just please, for the love of God, by default this is at 4 times SSAA. It's a ridiculously expensive anti-aliasing solution, so put it at disabled and play the game like this for good performance. At 18 watts we got similar numbers to Yakuza 0. Remember, it's the same city. There are some drops into the 60s when running around the city, which again I don't think is a big deal because you're not on combat. When you're on combat, it's when it's going to be in a closed environment. You're going to see that in a moment. Oh no, not with Majima. So when you're on combat, there's a lot of people around you, and you're in a more closed-off environment, to say it in some way. It becomes a bit less demanding, to say it in some way. Basically over 60, well within the VRR window, like in Yakuza 0. If you plug in the Ally to the wall, you basically can do 30 watts with the official charger, and you'll be into the 80s instead of the 70s. So yeah, you get 10 extra frames, but again in this game being above 60 I think is kind of a waste of battery. With 18 watts you get 90 minutes of battery at best, which again is, I'm sounding like a broken record, but 1.5 hours of battery is pretty good on the ROG Ally, considering what battery life you get on Turbo, which is less than an hour. Yakuza Kiwami 2, this one is on the Dragon engine, the latest one on the franchise when it comes to technology, one of the latest ones, which is way more demanding. This is basically Yakuza 2 on the latest engine, at least at the time. So low shadows, they look fine. I mean, it's not like we disable shadows, geometry on medium, reflections yes, and textures on medium. So we're doing 900p on this one, because again, very demanding, and we're playing on 18 watts. But 18 watts, you should be basically 40 and above. 1080p, I think, in this case is kind of a waste. And this on the smaller screen looks good enough. And again, around 90 minutes of battery on a full charge. Let's go into combat, so we got effects on screen. But again, shadows on low, it's an absolute necessity on this one. But it feels smooth. Smooth enough, considering, again, there's a lot of physics involved on this one. And it was also the first Dragon Engine game on PC. So let's just call it the least optimized one. And when plugged in, we jump into 52. We jump from 18 watts all the way up to 30 watts. So you're closer to the low 50s instead of the low 40s. Quite a big improvement in my opinion. Still pretty demanding, as you can probably notice. But at least the GPU usage is pretty high. Should you do 720p? I mean, you can, but it won't hit 60 FPS, so I think it's better off, you're better off at 900p. Best balance of visuals and performance. And if you're plugged in, I mean, on the smaller screen, 900p looks good enough. If you don't mind 30s, go full on 1080p. But I think again, 900p on the smaller screen looks more than good. 720 looks a bit soft because the native resolution is 1080. But still. And I love the physics in the Dragon Engine. Look at this. That's funny. Yakuza 3 Remastered, 1080p, 120Hz for VRR support. Unfortunately, the game is capped to 6 FPS. You cannot go higher. This is a PS3 era game. So that's how it goes, unfortunately. But you have fidelity effects sharpening if you're interested in using it. In this game, with the high resolution we got, it's not much of an issue. So it's basically 60s, but there's an issue with... I mean, it's the same game as the PlayStation 3 era, but with a higher resolution. There might be some extra changes that I'm not on top of my mind, but the draw distance of everything is basically the same as before. But you can notice that there's stuttering. Well, you can fix that actually with a mod. So somebody basically fixed it with a mod somehow, so you can download it. I haven't installed it here, but it was just to show you what issue to expect. It should also lower the CPU resources that it uses. But overall, runs completely fine at 18 watts, unplugged, on battery power, 1.5 hours of battery, give or take, as usual, on the ROG Ally at 18 watts. And it's a very old game. The only thing that bothers me is those stutters, that you actually need a mod for it to be way smoother. There you go, not much to say about this one, runs at 60 just fine, without the mod stutters. Otherwise, you're good to go. Yakuza 4 Remastered, 1080p. Again, remember to select 120 for VRR to work. FPS cap 60, doesn't go above 60, it's an old game. Basically like this, you also have sharpening like in Yakuza 3. And I think there's a mod for this one as well when it comes to stability. And I played this game actually on PlayStation 3, so it's been a while. But I remember finishing this game actually a while back. And as you can probably notice, the draw distance of the characters is from the PS3 era, but I love the reflection on the ground due to the rain. What is kind of bothersome, once again, the micro stutter, which can be improved with a mod. I think in this case we also got a mod. But the game works great. 18 watts, if you're at 30 watts, it's not going to change anything. You're still going to be at 60 with some stutter. And you get basically, on a full charge, 90 minutes of battery, give or take. We're now at 54% battery, hence why it says 42 minutes. So yeah, it's completely fine. And since it's an old game from the PS3 era at a higher resolution, it's older technology than Yakuza 0. And, well, that's why it's limited to 60. Yakuza 5, same as 3 and 4. Locked to 60, unfortunately. And these are the settings. You also have CMAA on this one, which looks a bit better than FXAA in my opinion. And this is yet another one from PlayStation 3. And it runs just fine at 60. At 18 watts, 90 minutes of battery. Like on the previous ones, no issues whatsoever running this game. It's completely fine. Of course, the draw distance, being an older game, is quite poor. And I played this on PlayStation 3 but never finished it. It's such a long game. You have like 5 playable characters. And it takes forever to finish this game. But it's a lot of fun once you get into it. But it feels like it never ends. And it has some wacky sections that are pretty funny. When you play as Haruka and you have to do dance battles on the streets. So it's not hand-to-hand combat in those sections. Which I think it was pretty funny at the time. Pretty unexpected. But again, 90 minutes of battery. 60 is basically all the time. 1080p. 120 Hz for VRR to be engaged. And you stay at 60 because older game locked to 60 basically. Yakuza 6, the Song of Life, 720. Remember to select 120 for VRR. And well, this is another Dragon Engine game, of course. 18 watts for battery play. Let's be real here. SSAO enabled, render scale at 100%. And everything like this. Low shadows because it's the most demanding option. And at 18 watts, as you can probably notice, well, first of all, we're going to get probably 40 to 60, give or take. It really depends on what's going on. If you want to stick closer to the 50s, you probably want to increase the wattage to 20 watts. But of course, it will be less than 1.5 hours of battery. This should guarantee 90 minutes of battery. But again, this is one of those Dragon Engine games. And we got a bug over here. Doinks. But this engine has lots of physics objects. I mean, you can see it right there. And this is a game that I played both on PS4 and PS5. On PS5, unfortunately, it didn't have any enhancements. So it was like 1080p, I think, or 900p at 30 FPS. So being able to play this at 50 to 60 on a VRR screen, despite being 720p, I mean, on the smaller screen it looks good enough. A little bit of the UI feels kind of pixelated at times. But again, well within the VRR window. This game doesn't have TAA. And as you can see, the shadow sacrifice in some parts tends to be pretty noticeable. But again, on this game, I think this feels good enough, especially due to the VRR screen. Crank it up to 20 watts to be more consistently into the 50s. And as you can see, it's much more consistent. Instead of being into the mid-40s, it's in the mid to upper 50s, which is a huge improvement. We're still at 720, but again, we are targeting 50 to 60 FPS. Although, if you want higher quality, maybe 900p is a better idea when plugged in. If you don't care about hitting 50 to 60 and you don't mind 40s, 900p will be way better when it comes to how defined the image is. Of course, it's a higher resolution. There are some sections that still drop because we're CPU limited. You can see the GPU is not maxed out. So I think we have some room to spare for 900p. Now same settings as before, but 900p instead of 720. For people that like higher resolutions and don't mind sacrificing some of the performance. You're still over 40. Should feel smooth enough. Way better than the 30 FPS I had playing the PS4 version on PS5. That, again, I might add, is completely locked to 30 FPS. So this is night and day when it comes to fluidity. And we're playing at 900p now. 1080p I think is kind of a waste. You can do 1080p at 30 just fine. But, I mean, if you can do 40s, why do 30s? Especially on a smaller screen. 1080p, in my opinion, is overkill for the ROG Ally. Like a Dragon, Ishin. So this one was a PlayStation 3 game, then it was revealed on UE4. We got XeSS and FSR 2.1. XeSS I think looks better. In this game it requires you to be on 1080p or higher to use it for some reason. So balanced XeSS, basically medium settings with high textures. Alright, so we're at 18 watts on 1080p with balanced XeSS, which I think looks good enough. If you don't like how it looks, you can always do FSR 2.1, it's UE4, but at the same time, in the bigger cities and all that, when you're running around doing your stuff, it doesn't run as well. We got some CPU limitation. But yeah, if you're playing at 1080 with balanced XeSS, looks amazing on the smaller screen, super crisp. Oh yeah. Not much else to say about it. It's completely fine. If you're plugged into the wall, even better. You're going to be closer to the 70s. But I recommend to stay on balanced XeSS. I think it's good enough, at least in my opinion. Yakuza Like a Dragon, 1080p, 120 of course for VRR. These are the settings. And well, what to say about this one? Combat is turn-based now, so I'm not targeting any particularly high frame rate, and by high frame rate I mean the 50s or something like that. We're playing on native 1080p and it works just fine. Remember that this is again a turn-based game. I don't think it's a big deal to be into the 30s. You can do 900p if you want to be closer to 40s. That bothers you. But I think playing on the native 1080p is good enough. I mean, you're on the native resolution, looks the sharpest. It's a bit overkill in my opinion, as I said multiple times for a small screen like this. But I mean, I don't see the point of playing this much higher than 30-something FPS. I mean, yeah, you're running around doing all that stuff, but it's turn-based. And we are at 18 watts, so 90 minutes of battery on a full charge. And we're at native resolution. Again, 900p if you want something smoother looking, but I mean, just look at this. As you can probably tell, I'm not a fan of turn-based Yakuza. I rather do it on my own. The fighting, I mean. So let's plug it in and see how it runs when plugged into the wall at 30 watts. We're at 1080p, so when you're plugged into the wall, if you do 900p, you're probably closer to the 50s, 50 to 60 FPS range. So if you don't mind lowering the resolution, which again, I think 1080p is a bit overkill for such a small screen, you can do it. But again, turn-based, it's not a big deal. I mean, it's not like you're actively doing something that requires a lot of timing. There's some blocking that you can do manually, but that's basically it. I mean, I'm basically moving forwards and backwards. And of course I missed because I couldn't get close to him. Like a Dragon, Gaiden, the man who raised his name, 900p, 120 Hz, as usual, basically medium settings, and props to this game, has FSR 1, FSR 2, FSR 3 and XeSS. XeSS is a bit more demanding, so in this case I recommend FSR 3. There's also optionally frame generation, but for now let's stick to FSR 3 quality at 900p without being plugged to the wall. So we're basically at 18 watts to maximize battery life. On a full charge it should be basically 90 minutes, an hour and a half. And I'm a complete badass right now. Oh, okay. And again, we're in the VRR window. 48 to 120 is the VRR window. I recommend personally 20 watts for this one to be closer to the 50s, upper 50s. But I mean, this game runs completely fine. They really did optimize this one. It's one of the newest ones in the franchise without taking into account infinite wealth. And I really like how it performs at 18 watts. I think it's pretty impressive. And we're just using quality FSR 3. Now plugged into the wall, 30 watts, so we can do 1080p now. Same settings as before, basically medium, but this time FSR3 unbalanced instead of quality. And well, what to say, we're closer to maintain 60s across the board. Closer, doesn't mean that's test there all the time. But the image quality is significantly better. Again, on the smaller screen, I think it's overkill, so you probably want to do 900p. The same settings as 18 watts.
Have a little rest.
But I think this is good enough because we're, again, well within the VRR window. And closer to the native resolution, obviously. So by itself is going to look better in general. You can also use XeSS on 900p if you want a bit better image quality. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, the latest one in this franchise, and 900p for portable play, 18 watts, basically medium settings, and in this case I'm using XeSS quality. So now in combat, as you can see, we drop into the 40s, we are at 18 watts, and unfortunately, at least personal preference of course, is more like a Dragon, that requires you to do turn-based fighting. Kiryu though, if you enable this special mode, you can do manual combat like in the previous game. But again, it's like a special attack thing. And you're not as active as on the other game, basically. That you have to actively dodge and do stuff like that. Then you go back to going turn-based. Which I like that they put both there. But it's not like you can completely stop doing turn-based stuff. It's still there. So, again, personal preference. Let's plug it in and see how it runs at 30 watts. We're now plugged into the wall, 30 watts with quality XeSS and the same settings as before. Again, turn-based game 100% of the time. Well, not 100% of the time. 90% of the time is turn-based like this. But if we're playing as Kiryu, the special attacks, one of the special attacks, makes you play like in the previous games. But the enemies are not responding to you like on the other ones. This is clearly a turn-based game first and foremost. But you stay above 30 FPS, which again, I don't think you need much more than that in this game in particular. Because 90-something% turn-based. That special attack is the only real-time combat you get out of it. Again, I'm not a fan of turn-based combat in the Yakuza games, but hey, here we go. There's some people that enjoy it, and that's completely fine. So now, as a bonus, I'm going to show you the Judgement games, so let's get into those right now. For Judgement, we're using 900p, 120Hz for VRR. Shadows, I think we can push them to medium, but it's okay. Well, settings like this, quality FSR 2.1 because it performs better and looks okay enough. And we're now on battery power at 18 watts. And yeah, this is the same city as in the Yakuza games, but with a completely different story and character. This is a fantastic game. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. And as you can see at 18 watts, we are well inside the VRR window, which is wonderful. That means that at a very low power, with 90 minutes of battery, you can get pretty good performance. But as you can probably notice, it runs just fine. Another Dragon Engine game, so you got the wacky physics. And the story of this game overall is fantastic. So again, if you haven't played it, please do. It's awesome. And as you can see, it's very well optimized. 900p, 18 watts, completely fine. 90 minutes of battery on a full charge, which it says 36 minutes because I'm at 50% battery, give or take. So yeah, around 90 minutes on a full charge at 18 watts. So I think it's time to show you how it runs when plugged in. Same settings as before now, but on 1080p plugged into the wall. And well, 30 watts, you can do 25, again if you're on a power bank. I think that will be a better use of power. because performance is pretty similar, but now we're on 1080p with quality FSR instead of 900p. And as you can see, despite the higher pixel count, we're still into the 60s range. Some stutters here and there, but nothing major, I'd say. Mostly into the 60s. And the reactions of the enemies are hilarious. Also, you can always use balanced FSR if you want to be closer to 60. But this looks super sharp on the smaller screen. 900p as well, but here we have the extra GPU power, so you might as well. So plugged into the wall is pretty nice, not gonna lie. But it's obvious, we're using way more power, so it better be good. For Lost Judgment, we're doing something similar to the previous game, Judgment, 900p in portable play for 18 watts, medium settings, quality FSR 2.1, there is optionally XeSS as well if you're interested, but for battery power play, we are actually doing this. As you can see in the city, we're still fine. I think it runs even a little bit better than the other game, than the previous one. So the Yakuza franchise on the ROG Ally is fantastic, really. You can play almost all of the games at 60. You're mostly, I mean, into the 40s to 50s range if you're playing something of the newer ones. But the Dragon Engine games, some of them actually reach 50 to 60 even at 18 watts, like this one. Which I think is actually pretty impressive, considering how they run on the consoles. Fine, let's continue. So as I was saying, the older ones that are not the Dragon Engine games, easily over 60 FPS. You probably need a mod for the PS3 era titles, because they have some weird spikes on the frame time. There's a mod to fix that, linked in the description. Didn't use it because, again, when most people are not going to download that, it's only dragging a few files into the main folder, so no big deal. It's pretty easy to install. Then the Judgement games actually run better than the Dragon Engine Yakuza games, which I'm very happy to see, despite they having combat as well, very similar to the other ones. I don't know how they did it, how they did make it run better. So now that we're plugged in at 30 watts, we can do 1080p with the same settings as before, which is basically medium, like on the other Dragon Engine games. But to sum up, the Dragon Engine games run... it's a mixed bag actually. They usually run 40 to 60. On the turn-based games, like a Dragon and the Infinite Wealth one, since those are turn-based, I didn't really prioritize having a very high frame rate. And by very high, I mean over 50 or close to 60 FPS. You can definitely do that, but you need to sacrifice the resolution quite a bit.
Must be my imagination.
So yeah. In my opinion, the turn-based ones are fine at 30 to 40, and the other ones 50 to 60. But the Dragon Engine games like this one are getting way better optimized as time goes on, so I don't know how they did it. But I mean, the city is the same as in the other games, so it should run the same or worse, but it actually runs better than the Yakuza games on the same engine. So I'm very glad to see this on running so well. At 18 watts, 900p. At 30 watts or 25 even, you can do 1080p. So yeah, I'm well within the VRR window on all of them. Except the turn-based ones, of course. Because on those I don't really prioritize having a high frame rate. So yeah, that's the Yakuza franchise on the ROG Ally. I hope you enjoyed it. I also did it on the Steam Deck, on the non-OLED one. But it's still completely fine on the Steam Deck in my opinion. It's just weaker hardware. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did revisiting the entire Yakuza franchise, including Judgement, which technically is not a Yakuza game, but same engine, same city, different story, basically. So see you next time. Thanks for watching.